Hello friends, welcome to Naukar Digital Institute. I am CA Vatsal Shah. Welcome to the rapid revision of the paper 5 advanced accounting, and I am starting with my portion, that is nothing but the accounting standard. I will try to cover entire accounting standard of the paper 2, that is nothing but the group 2. Paper 5 of the group 2. Clear? So let's start without wasting much time, and the first accounting standard is nothing but the accounting standard 4. The name of accounting standard 4 is contingencies in events occurring after balance sheet date. Basically, in accounting standard 4, there are two topics is covered. Number 1 is nothing but the contingencies, and number 2 is nothing but the events occurring after the balance sheet date. So friends, if we discuss about the contingency, the circumstances of the event should be available on the date of balance sheet, result of which is not known. Result is only known after happening or non-happening of future uncertain event, which is not either wholly or partly within the control of the enterprise, and the result may be a gain or the may be a loss. Simple, if it is a gain, then it will be considered as a contingent gain, but if it is a loss, then simply it will be considered as a contingent loss. Clear? And simple accounting standard 4 is not applicable to the insurance enterprise. If any obligation is recognized because of the retirement obligation under the accounting standard of 15, and the commitment arising because of the lease contract under accounting standard 19. Now, how we can estimate the loss? Friends, for estimation of the loss, first of all, we will make a priority, that is nothing but the expert opinion. And if the expert opinion is not available, then simply loss should be determined by using the management estimate. Clear? Now friends, let's understand the accounting of this particular contingent loss and the contingent gain. Friends, if it is a contingent gain, then it is never and ever recorded in the books of accounts. If it is that much material, 110% you can disclose that contingent gain in the director's report if you want to disclose. Otherwise, in the notes to accounts, you cannot disclose because it is a violation of the prudence concept. Whenever I am discussing about the contingent loss, friends, forget everything. Number of students are thinking that every contingent liability is the disclosed in the notes to accounts. If you are thinking like this, then simple, your thinking is very wrong. Friends, for determining the contingent liability accounting, we will determine the probability. And if that event is considered as a probable, then friends, we will make a provision. If that event is a reasonable, then it should be disclosed in the notes to accounts. But if that event is nothing but the remote, then it should be ignored. Now, what is the meaning of the probable? Probable means nothing but the probability of the event is more than 50%. Reasonable matlab probability of the event is a more than 5% but less than or equal to 50%, and the remote is nothing but the less than or equal to 5%. Clear? So if it is exact 50%, then it will be considered as a reasonable, but if it is exact 5%, then it will be considered as a remote. Clear? Can I go ahead? Now, the most important thing is that events occurring after balance sheet date. Friends, if any event took place between the date of the balance sheet and the financial statement approved by the competent authority is considered as an event occurring after the balance sheet date. I use the word the financial statement approved by the competent authority. So if it is the case of the partnership firm, then it is approved by the partner, proprietorship, then proprietor, company, then the director, trust, then trustee. Clear? Friends, we will not check the date of approval by the shareholder, we will check the date of approval by the management only. Clear? And if any event took place between this date, then simple, it will be considered as an event occurring after balance sheet date. Friends, you know very well, for event occurring after balance sheet date, there are two types of event. One is nothing but the adjusting event, and the second one is nothing but the non-adjusting event. If we start the discussion of the adjusting event, if the circumstances of the event is available on the date of balance sheet, just you are getting the additional evidence after the balance sheet but before the approval of the financial statement, then it will be considered as an adjusting event. And whenever it's an adjusting event, that should be adjusted in the accounts. Clear? Best example is fire took place on the 29th March, but you know the amount of the loss due to fire on the 2nd April. So simply, this will be considered as an adjusting event. What is the meaning of the non-adjusting event? If the circumstances of the event is not available on the date of balance sheet, that is took place after the balance sheet, then simply it will be considered as a non-adjusting event. We will not adjust our accounts for the non-adjusting event. Best example is decline in the market value of investment, major business combination, major restructuring plan, change in the tax rate. Clear? But yes, friends, this is the most important point. If any non-adjusting event which is affects actually your going concern, then it should be adjusted. Sir, can you give an example? Yes. I am having a one factory, and on the 2nd April, a fire took place at my factory. If the fire took place on that factory, simply, actually it's on the event on the 2nd April, but can I say I am having only one factory, and if one factory is destroyed because of the fire, then simply it affects my going concern. And if any non-adjusting event is affects your going concern, then it should be adjusted in your books of accounts. Clear? Yes, please understand, this is the most important thing. My balance sheet date is nothing but the 31st March. My financial statement approval date, it's let's say on the 15th August. But the event took place on the 20th August. The number of students are writing an answer that this event will be considered as a non-adjusting event. If you are writing this answer, then you are wrong. Why, friends? Because this is actually not in the scope of the accounting standard 4. Because what is my definition? If any event took place between the date of the balance sheet and the financial statement approved by the competent authority, will be considered as an event occurring after the balance sheet date. Here, event took place after approval of the accounts. So simple, it will be considered as events occurring after approval of the accounts, and it will be not in the scope of the accounting standard 4. Clear? Next. Before 2016, there was a concept like the proposed dividend. Means for the financial year 2018-19 ends on 31st March 19, and we are declaring the dividend in the year 1920. Still, on 31st March 19, we are recognizing the proposed dividend under the heading of the short-term provision. Now, after revision in the 2016 in accounting standard 4, there is no concept of the proposed dividend. Now, we are having only one concept of the declared dividend. If for the year 2018-19, if we are declaring the dividend in the year 2019-20, then we will recognize the dividend in the year 1920 only in the name of the declared dividend. Clear? Perfect. So finally my AS4 ends here. Yes, very short accounting standard. Now AS5. The accounting standard name AS5 is nothing but the net profit or loss for the prior period item and the change in accounting policy. If anyone asks you, as per accounting standard 5, your profit and loss statement is prepared by 5 things. Number 1, profit or loss due to change in accounting policy, profit or loss due to change in accounting estimate, prior period item, extraordinary item, and if it is not covered in the above 4, then it will be considered as an ordinary item. Clear? Again, I want to clarify. As per accounting standard 5, your profit and loss statement is prepared by using the 5 things, nothing but profit or loss due to change in accounting policy, profit or loss due to change in accounting estimate, prior period item, extraordinary item, and if it is not covered in above 4, then simply it will be considered as an ordinary item. Let's start a discussion with the ordinary item. Friends, what is the meaning of the ordinary item? If any item is directly related with our business, then it will be considered as an ordinary item. Normally, there is no special disclosure is required for the ordinary item. Clear? There is no special disclosure is required for the ordinary item. But friends, please understand, there are some items which are actually an ordinary, but that item is having a special nature and amount. So if any ordinary item with a special nature and amount will be considered as exceptional item, Simple, profit or loss on sale of fixed asset, profit or loss on sale of investment, decline in the value of inventory, litigation expense, settlement expense, and the reversal of the provision. Friends, how can we bifurcate the item is an ordinary or extraordinary? If that particular item is directly related to your business activity, then it will be considered as an ordinary item. But if any item is not directly related with your business activity, then it will be considered as an extraordinary item. Simply you have to speak this like this. If I am doing business, that's why if I am incurring expenses, then simply ordinary, otherwise extraordinary. If I am doing business, that's why my turnover is higher. And if my turnover is higher, that's why I need a tax audit. And for that, I am paying fees to the chartered accountant, ordinary. I am doing business, that's why earthquake occurred and we are providing a loss. No, this is not directly related to business. I am doing business, that's why fire occurred and we are recognizing the loss. No, this is not an ordinary item because this is not related to directly your business. So if you are doing a business, that's why you are using an asset. Now this asset is an old and you are selling this asset. So simple, profit or loss on sale of asset is an ordinary item. You are doing business, that's why you are having the excess fund and you are investing that excess fund in the investment, and now you are selling that investment. This is again an ordinary item. Clear? But these are the such item. This is an ordinary item, but with a special nature and amount, so that we will disclose that particular item on the face of P&L. Clear? Next, extraordinary item. If any item is not related to actually directly related to your business activity, then it will be considered as an extraordinary item. Actually, the definition of an extraordinary item is like this: any item other than the ordinary item, like loss due to earthquake, loss due to fire. If your property is attached, in accounting standard 12, we found that whenever we are refunding the government grant, then it will be considered as an extraordinary item. Clear? Now, please understand what AS5 suggests. Extraordinary items should be disclosed in such a way so that impact on P&L can be perceived. Means understand. Means in the simple language, extraordinary items should be disclosed on the face of P&L. Please understand there are two things in the market. One is on the face of P&L and second is in the P&L. Revenue from operation is disclosed on the face of P&L. Other income is disclosed on the face of P&L, but in other income, if we want to find out what is the commission income, interest income, dividend income, that is disclosed in the notes to account, so we can say that is disclosed in the P&L. Depreciation and amortization expense is written on the face of P&L. But if we want to get exact amount of the depreciation on machinery, depreciation on plant, depreciation on building, that will be disclosed in the P&L. Clear? So simple friends, please understand, extraordinary item should be disclosed in such a way so that impact on P&L can be perceived. Clear? Okay. Ordinary, extraordinary we have covered. Now I am starting the point that is called the change in accounting policy, exactly similar to your accounting standard 1. If anyone asks you, can we change our accounting policy? Your first answer should be no. You cannot change your accounting policy because of the consistency concept. But change in accounting policy is allowed only in the 3 situations. Number 1, if it is required by law. Number 2, if it is required by the accounting standard. And the number 3, for the better preparation and the presentation of financial statement. Friends, whenever you are changing your accounting policy, you should disclose the minimum 4 things in the notes to accounts. Old policy, new policy, reason for the change and the impact on P&L. Like first of all, I am using the FIFO method. And as per FIFO, my closing stock is nothing but the 100. But in the current year, I am changing my accounting policy from FIFO to weighted average. And as per the weighted average, my closing stock amount is nothing but the 120. So don't you think so, my closing stock is increased by 20, and you know very well if your closing stock is increased by 20, obviously your profit should be increased. Clear? That 20 rupees profit is arising because of the change in accounting policy. And the change in accounting policy, any profit or loss due to change in accounting policy should be disclosed in the notes to accounts. Clear? Okay, let's go ahead. Change in accounting estimates is pending. What is change in accounting estimate? Whenever we are preparing the accounts, we are taking the various estimates, like estimates for the provision, estimate for the useful life, estimate for the scrap value. And if we are changing our accounting policy estimate, then friends, we should provide the prospective fact. And if any change is because of the change in accounting estimate, then simply it will be separately disclosed in the P&L. One more thing here I want to convey. As per accounting standard 10 read with accounting standard 5, any change in depreciation method is not considered as a change in accounting policy, but it will be considered as a change in accounting estimate, and simply we should provide the prospective fact. Next and the most important, what is the meaning of the prior period item? If any income or expenses is recorded in the current year due to omission in the previous period. If any expense and income are recorded in the current year because that was not recorded in the previous years, then simply it will be considered as a prior period item. Clear? There are prior period item includes mistake. Actually, that is unintentional. It includes fraud, which is actually intentional. If it is an oversight, means actually some information is available, but we have ignored that information. And friends, prior period item should be disclosed in such a way so the impact on P&L can be perceived. Clear? Now friends, if I discuss, understand that if you are adopting something for the first time, or the substance of the transaction is changing, then in that situation we will not consider that particular thing as a change in accounting policy. Sir, can you give an example? Till date, my company is not giving any bonus to its employee. But from the current year, my company wants to give the bonus to the employee. So simply we are adopting for the first time. And if we are adopting for the first time, it will not be considered as a change in accounting policy. Number 2, till date, one asset or one building is nothing but the property, plant and equipment and accounted under the accounting standard 10. Simply that's why we are providing the depreciation and all every year. But now if that building is simply transferred as an inventory in our ordinary course of business, so simply now we will not value that particular building at historical cost only. Now we will value that particular building at a cost or NRV whichever is lower. So simply this is not considered as a change in accounting policy, because first of all that building was accounted under AS 10. Now that building is for the purpose of sale in our ordinary course of business. So actually we have to apply the accounting standard too. Clear? So simply if I can summary, for ordinary items special disclosure is not required. But if that ordinary item is with a special nature and amount, means that is nothing but the exceptional item, then it should be disclosed on the face of P&L. Extraordinary item is disclosed on the face of P&L. Any profit or loss because of the change in accounting policy or because of the change in accounting estimate is separately disclosed in the P&L, and the prior period item is again disclosed on the face of P&L. Clear? Now I am starting the accounting standard 7, that is nothing but the construction contract. This is the most important accounting standard in group 2. Friends, first of all, you should understand that what is the meaning of the construction contract. If two parties entered into the contract for construction of an asset or the group of asset, and they are specifically negotiated for the construction, then that thing will be considered as a construction contract. Again I am repeating, if two or more parties entered into contract for the construction of an asset or a group of asset, and more they are basically negotiating for the construction of the asset, then simply they will be considered as a construction contract. Friends, please understand, accounting standard 7 is only and only applicable to the contractor and not applicable to the contractee. What is the meaning of the contractor? The person who is constructing the building, that person is considered as a contractor. The person for whom this building is constructed will be considered as a contractee. Whenever I use the word, this AS7 is only and only applicable to the contractor. So one thing is very clear, we are learning the revenue recognition from the construction contract and nothing else. One more important thing, accounting standard 7 is only applicable to the construction contract, and my accounting standard 7 is not applicable to the real estate contract. Sir, is there any difference between the construction and the real estate? Yes. In construction contract, specifically negotiation is done for the construction. Actually, in the real estate contract, your asset is ready to use. Clear? In construction contract, you are doing the construction of an asset as per the design of the contractee. But in the real estate, it is already ready. Clear? Simply, you cannot modify anything. And accounting standard 7 is only applicable to the construction and not applicable to real estate. If we discuss, there are two types of construction contract. One is a fixed price contract and the second is nothing but the cost plus contract. In fixed price contract, your consideration is fixed in advance. Irrespective of the number of units, irrespective of the labor hours, your consideration is fixed in advance. But in the cost plus profit contract, your consideration is not fixed in advance. Whatever expenses is incurred by the contractor, that person will submit proof to the contractee, and the contractee will reimburse the expenses plus something profit margin, and that profit margin is fixed in the advance. Clear? So basically there are two types of contract, but actually if you ask me, in practical life, maximum we found that the combo means, actually in a practical life the material is decided on the basis of the cost plus profit, but your labor is decided as a fixed price. Clear? Next, if I go ahead, sometimes we are entering into the contract with the same party, and if we are entering into the contract for the same party for the various assets, so can we combine that particular contract for accounting purpose? Answer is yes, if you are fulfilling all the three conditions. Number one, the group of contract is negotiated as a single package. Number two, the contract are so closely interrelated, means the price of the one contract depends on the price of the another contract. And the number third, the contracts are performed in a continuous sequence. If you are fulfilling all the three conditions, you can combine the contract. But yes, when a contract covers the number of assets, should be treated as a separate contract when you are fulfilling this particular three situation. Number one, separate proposal have been submitted for each asset. Each asset has been subject to separate negotiation and the both parties have been able to accept or reject. And the cost and the revenue of each asset can be identified. Actually, it's exactly opposite of the combining of the contract. In the combining of the contract, my first condition, the group of contract negotiated as a single package. And here segmenting, the segment proposal have been, separate proposal have been submitted for each contract. In combining, the second condition is that the price of the one contract depends on the price of the another contract. In here, second condition is that each asset has been subject to separate negotiation and both parties have been able to accept or reject. Third situation in the combining contract is nothing but the contracts are performed in a continuous sequence, and here the cost and revenue of each contract can be identified. Clear? So now till date we have learned the meaning of the contract, types of the contract, and the segmenting and combining. And now we are moving forward for the accounting. But before accounting, you should understand the meaning of the contract revenue. You should understand the meaning of the contract cost. And by using that contract revenue and the contract cost, we will determine the profit. So if we discuss about the contract revenue, friends, contract revenue basically includes 6 things. Which 6 things? Initial contract revenue, plus modification, incentive, escalation, claim, and the penalty. If I discuss one by one, first of all, initial contract revenue, that is fixed in advance. Modification. Let's assume I am a contractor and I am constructing a flat for you. Everything is ready and I am just giving a position to you. But you ask me, you have not done plaster of Paris POP in our main hall. And I submitted the contract copy to you and I already told you that was not mentioned in the contract. That's why I have not done. If you want to do the POP in your main hall, then I am ready to do, but with the price of rupees 1 lakh. So simply, at the time of the contract, if something is not decided and you are doing some extra work, then you are eligible to receive some extra amount, then simply it will be considered as a modification fee, incentive. At the time of contract, it is fixed. Normally, the contract term is nothing but the 24 months, but if I will complete little bit earlier, my contractee will pay me a 50,000 rupees. So simple, this will be considered as an incentive. If I will complete late by 24 months, then simply my amount will be deducted, and that's why penalty is nothing but the deducted. Escalation. Because of the change in the price in the material, if you are eligible to receive some excess amount, then it will be considered as an escalation. And the basically claim. Claim is nothing but the reimbursement of expenses plus something profit. Friends, please understand. You can recognize any contract revenue only and only if there is a certainty of the realization and the amount is measurable. Again, I am repeating, if there is a certainty of the realization of that amount and the amount is measurable, then you can only recognize the contract revenue, otherwise you are not eligible. Clear? Contract cost. As per Accounting Standard 7, contract cost basically includes just 2 things. Number 1, that is nothing but the directly attributable cost, means direct cost and any attributable cost. Clear? But please understand that if any contract cost is incurred specifically for obtaining the contract, then that particular cost is only added in the contract cost if we get the contract. Otherwise, we are not eligible to recognize that contract cost. Clear? But yes, whenever I am using the word the directly attributable cost, which things should be considered? Labor cost, material cost, debris, higher charges of the plant, and the cost of the technical design. And at the time of the construction, if any scrap is generated and if we are selling that scrap in the market and if we are earning any revenue, then it should not be credited to P&L, but it should be adjusted from the contract cost. Clear? If we now understand the exclusion from the cost of contract, contract cost not includes basically 5 things. Any cost is incurred for the future activity, advance given to supplier, research and development cost, admin cost, and selling cost. Clear? Now friends, please understand. Sometimes we don't determine that whether this contract finished or not. Like let's assume this is a river and my contractee asks me to build a house in between the river. So actually we both are not actually confirmed that that will happen or not. So actually when you are not determining the outcome of the contract, you cannot recognize the contract revenue in advance. In that situation, you should recognize the maximum revenue up to the contract cost only. Clear? Okay. So now if I go ahead, for percentage completion method, number of students are thinking that that is only one method, but you are wrong. There are total 3 methods. Number 1 cost method, number 2 survey method, and number 3 this is nothing but a physical output method. No doubt. Whatever you are solving the sum, that all the sums are totally depends on the one method, and that is nothing but the cost method. And what is the formula for the cost method? Cost incurred till date divided by total estimated cost into 100, and you will get the percentage completion. Survey method. In survey method, we are not emphasizing on the cost. Basically, we are hiring one expert of this field, means architect or the civil engineer. And we are obtaining the report from that particular person, and he will determine how many percentage work is completed. Clear? And the number 3rd, that is nothing but the physical output method. Some people also told as labor hours method. In this particular situation, we are not considering the cost, but we are considering the time period. Like if we are thinking that this will take approx 30 months to complete, and out of 30 months, let's assume we have completed the work of the 6 months, simply it will consider as my percentage completion is a 20%. So basically for percentage completion, you are having a 3 method, cost method, survey method, and the physical output method. One more important thing, you should understand that whenever in the construction contract, you are determining that your contract cost is more than the contract revenue, then in that particular situation, you should recognize the provision for losses. Sir, why we are considering that as a provision for losses and not losses only? Because one thing is very confirmed. I am having the estimated contract cost and I am not having the actual contract cost. So by that estimated contract cost, I am determining that my company will making a loss in this particular contract, but we are not sure for how much amount. Simple, for that purpose, we are making the provision for losses. You should also understand that sometimes before starting the construction contract, we are finding that my contract cost is more than the contract revenue. Then in that situation also, you should recognize the provision for loss. Clear? And yes, whenever you are finding any question of the construction contract, and if they ask for the disclosure, you have to minimum disclose contract revenue, contract cost, profit or loss, provision for losses, and amount due to or due from customer. Basically, when it's amount due to customer, whenever you are receiving some excess money, simply it will be considered as your liability. That's why it will be considered as an amount due to customer. And whenever you are eligible to receive some amount from the contractee, then simply it will be considered as an amount due from customer, and it is nothing but the asset for the company. Clear? So finally, I am ending accounting standard 7 here. Now if we start accounting standard 9, and the name of accounting standard 9 is a revenue recognition. Basically, you should understand the meaning of the revenue. Friends, revenue means gross inflow of the cash or receivable from 5 things: from sale of goods, from rendering of services, or from interest, dividend, and the royalty. Friends, my wording is very clear. Revenue means the gross inflow. If I am here, and here this is company ABC, if I am receiving 10 rupees as a commission, I am an agent of ABC, and if I am receiving the 10 rupees commission from the ABC, and I am appointed the sub-agent Mr. XYZ, and I am paying the 4 rupees to Mr. XYZ, then simply I cannot recognize the revenue directly at rupees 6, because the revenue means the gross inflow. Friends, that's why we have to recognize the revenue of rupees 10, and against that 10, we can disclose the rupees 4 as an expenses, but revenue is nothing but the 10 rupees only. Clear? Okay. If we check the non-applicability point, accounting standard 9 is not applicable at 6 places. Number 1, construction contract. Number 2, government grant, lease, foreign exchange gain, sale of fixed asset, and the sale of investment. Because you know very well, for everything we have one specific accounting standard. Whenever we are discussing about the construction contract, we are having one specific accounting standard 7. government grant 12, lease 19, foreign exchange gain 11, sale of fixed asset 10, and the sale of investment 13. Let's start the first point, that is nothing but sale of goods. When we can recognize the revenue from the sale of goods, if you are fulfilling the three conditions, then you can recognize the revenue from the sale of goods. Number one, ownership of the goods should be transferred. Number two, there is no, risk and reward is transferred. And the number three, there is no uncertainty regarding the amount of the consideration and its ultimate collection. Clear? Ownership should be transferred, risk and reward should be transferred, there is no uncertainty regarding the collection. Friends, please understand that revenue should be immediately recognized even if delivery of the goods is delayed at a buyer's request. Means friends, what? On 29th March, my goods is ready. I contacted to the buyer, your goods is ready, please pick up from my factory. He said, in my factory there is no space, please support for me a week. And he is taking the delivery, let's say on the 4th April. When we can recognize the revenue of the sale of goods in our books of accounts? Friends, my performance obligation is satisfied on the 29th March. And if my performance obligation is satisfied on the 29th March, I can recognize the entire revenue on the 29th March, even though possession is not transferred. Clear? Whenever it's a story of the rendering of the services, from the rendering of the services, you can recognize the revenue only and only when your performance of the service have been completed and there is no uncertainty regarding the collection. Friends, please understand, whenever you are changing the prices of the goods or services retrospectively, you can only able to recognize the revenue when its collection is certain. If that collection is doubtful, you cannot recognize the revenue from the price revision. Clear? Okay. Now I am taking the various special cases. You should understand that. First of all, let's take interest. Friends, interest income is always recorded on the basis of the time. Dividend. Dividend income is always recorded when your right to receive is established. And friends, in the dividend, your right to receive is established when the dividend is declared in the annual general meeting. Royalty. Actually, you have to determine that you are getting the fixed amount of royalty or that is totally variable. So, simple royalty amount is actually recorded as per the agreement. Sale and approval. This topic you have done in the CA foundation. Sale and approval, we can recognize the income only and only when it is approved by the customer or when the time limit completes, whichever is earlier basis. Consignment. You know very well, in consignment there are three parties. One is nothing but the consignor, second is nothing but the consignee, and the third number is nothing but the third party. Whenever consignor transfers the goods to the consignee, he is just transferring the possession and not the ownership. So he cannot recognize the revenue in their books of accounts. Revenue is only recognized when the consignee sold the goods to the third party. Clear? Tuition fees. For as tuition fees, if you are taking the tuition fee for the 3 years in advance, you cannot recognize the entire revenue today only. Tuition fee is always recognized on the basis of the time, on the course completion basis. Advertisement. Advertisement income is always recognized when advertisement appears before the general public. Clear? Club membership fee. Like in Ahmedabad, there is a club, Karnavati Club, Rajpath Club. They are taking the one-time membership fee for the lifetime. It is a capital receipt for them. They are actually Section 8 company and they are directly transferred that amount into the fund. Clear? If it is an annual club membership fee, always on the basis of the time. Clear? Next. Whenever you are exporting the goods and you are receiving some export benefit, at the date of the export, if it is a certain that you will receive the export benefit, then on the date of the export only you should recognize that export benefit as an income. But on the date of export, it is uncertain that you will receive or not export benefit. Then you should recognize the export benefit as an income only when you are receiving the export benefit. Clear? Next. Whenever you are transferring the goods on interdivisional basis, actually interdivisional transfer is not considered as a revenue as per accounting standard 9, because for the recognizing the revenue from the sale of goods, there are 3 conditions. And actually not any single condition is fulfilled in the interdivisional transfer. In interdivisional transfer, there is no ownership is transferred outside the entity. there is no risk and reward is transferred outside the entity. Yes, one division of the same entity is not paying any consideration to the other division of the same entity. Clear? So simply interdivisional transfer is not recognized the income in your books of accounts. One more point if I discuss of the accounting standard 9 is that concept called the repurchase agreement. If you are selling your goods today and with the same party you are entering into the contract for the repurchase of the same goods at a higher price on the future date, then it will be considered as a sale and repurchase agreement. And in the sale and repurchase agreement, that transaction is basically the transaction of the finance. And the one party will recognize the interest income in his books of account, and the second party will recognize the interest expense in his books of accounts. Clear? So this is the end of accounting standard 9 also. Clear? Can I go ahead? So I have completed 4, 5, 7 and the 9. Now, pure theoretical accounting standard, and that is accounting standard 17, segment reporting. Accounting standard 17, segment reporting. Friends, one thing is very clear. Here they are not talking about the combining of the things. They are talking about the segmenting of the things. If I can give you an example, every enterprise basically deals in the multiple products and at a different location. So every product and every location has a little bit different risk and reward. So simply, we have to provide that particular information to our stakeholder. And that information is basically called as a segment information, or that information is called as a segment reporting. If I can give an example of the multiple product, let's take an example. If I am giving an example of the Nestle, and you are the shareholder of the Nestle and I am giving you a data, Nestle has made the profit of rupees 1000 crore in the current year, and I want to ask you one question, are you happy? Actually, no answer with you. Because if I give some excess information, then you will get the answer. Nestle has made 900 crore profit from the product Maggi, and the remaining 100 crore profit is made from the chocolate. And now you are a little bit worried, because I am earning my major profitability from such a product. That product may be banned by the government in the near future, and at that time my profitability will not be similar. So simple, if you are bifurcating your business on the basis of the product and service, then it will be considered as a business segment. If I can give you a more example, you have used the word that is nothing but the Kingfisher liquor. I am not talking about the Kingfisher airline, I am talking about the Kingfisher liquor. Kingfisher, you are a shareholder of the Kingfisher liquor, and let's assume Kingfisher liquor has reported a profit of rupees 1000 crore. Are you happy? Actually, you are not having any answer. Why you are not having any answer? Because the problem is very clear. Kingfisher liquor is, let's assume, earning the major profitability from the state of Bihar. And if they are earning the major profitability from the state of Bihar, you are now little bit worried, because that particular state is banned the liquor, and now your profitability will not be same. So I am not bifurcating my particular business on the basis of the product and service, but I am bifurcating my business on the basis of the location. So that's why it will be considered as a geographical segment. Clear? Can I go ahead? Friends, first of all, you should identify this segment from your business. All the segments I will not disclose in the notes to accounts. I will select the segment by using some conditions, and that is called the reportable segment. And finally, we will disclose the segment. Problem is that, what is the meaning of the business segment? Basically, the business segment are the component of the business which are engaged in the production of goods and services are having the separate risk and reward. And such segment are based on the product production process, etc. Friends, accounting standard 17 suggested 5 factors. Whenever you are bifurcating your business on the basis of the product and service, means for identification of the business segment, you should use the minimum 5 factors. Number 1, nature of the product and services. Number 2, nature of production process, type of customer, distribution channel, and the regulatory authority. If I am bifurcating my business on the basis of the nature of the product and services, then the best example is a Tata. Because Tata is dealing in the various products, Tata Salt, Tanishq Jewelers, Titan Watches, Titan Glasses, even there is nothing but the TCS, Tata Docomo, Tata Sky, Tata Steel, Tata Motors. I think, are you following me? Best example of the nature of production process is nothing but the Amul. Let's say Amul is bifurcating their business into the two parts. Number one is nothing but the part in which every process is nothing but on the basis of the automatic, and the second part is nothing but it's a manual process. Third, type of customer, and the best example of the type of customer is nothing but the Reliance. Reliance is selling goods on the wholesale basis also, they are selling the goods on the retail basis also. Best example of the distribution channel is us, Navkar Digital Institute. Navkar Digital Institute is conducting the physical classes, face-to-face coaching classes at Ahmedabad in Gujarat. Navkar Digital Institute is giving the online lectures. Clear? So simple, we are giving our services by using the different modes. And the nature of the regulatory environment is best example is nothing but the ICICI or SBI. ICICI is a bank. So one regulatory authority, RBI will interfere. ICICI Lombard General Insurance, they are dealing in the insurance activities. So one more regulatory authority, that is nothing but the IRDA will interfere. Clear? Now if we determine the geographical segment means nothing but we are bifurcating our business on the basis of the location. Clear? So are the component of the business which are engaged in the production of goods and services in a particular area having separate risk from the other segment. This can be based on the location of asset and the location of customer. Clear? Now the most important, I use the word segment revenue. In segment revenue we will consider the revenue directly attributable to enterprise and the transaction with other segment. But yes, segment revenue is not includes any extraordinary gain, any interest and dividend income, and any gain on sale of investment. Please understand, you can consider the interest and dividend income and the gain on sale of investment if your primary nature of business is nothing but the finance. From the bank, if I remove the interest income, then nothing will be remaining. Clear? Okay. Whenever we are calculating the interest expense, we should consider expenses which are directly attributable to segment and expenses related to transaction with other segment. But yes, in a segment expense, we will not consider 5 things. Just remember, in segment revenue, we are not considering the extraordinary gain. So here we will not consider extraordinary loss. Revenue, we are not considering the interest income. Here we will not consider the interest expense. In revenue, we are not considering the gain on loss of investment. Here we will not consider the loss on sale of investment. Income tax expense and the general admin and office expense is also not considered. In segment asset, we will not consider 3 things. Income tax asset, head office asset, and the investment. Clear? You should learn this particular topic. Now, after identification of the segment, we have not to disclose all the segments in the notes to accounts. For that, we are having some condition. Number 1 condition, my segment revenue should be more than or equal to 10% of the total revenue. And whenever I am using the word the revenue, in this condition, we are considering the internal and external revenue both. Number 2, my segment result should be 10% or more than the total result in absolute term. In this particular case, what should you do? First of all, you should find out the profit from the all segment. Then you should find out the total loss from the all segment. You will compare the profit and loss and you will select whichever is higher. But that should be selected on absolute basis, means you should not consider the sign. And you should calculate 10% of that higher amount, and simply that segment will be disclosed. Number 3 condition, your segment asset should be 10% or more than the total asset. Please understand, in first 3 conditions, in between there is an or. Means if you are fulfilling the any one condition also, that segment should be disclosed. Clear? Number 4th condition, management may select any segment as a reportable segment. And the number 5th, ensure that at least 75% of the total external revenue should be reported. And if this condition is not fulfilled, management may select one or more segment as a reportable segment. Friends, you should concentrate here. In the first condition, we are considering the internal and external revenue both, but in the 5th condition, we are considering just external revenue. Next, if I go ahead, if any segment was a reportable segment under the 10% criteria in the previous year, In current year, if that segment is not fulfilling that 10% criteria, then also you should disclose that segment as a reportable segment. Clear? Next point. If company has only one segment, then obviously segment reporting is not required. And for interdivisional transfer, there is no specific accounting policy in Accounting Standard 17. Company may choose at its own policy. Means you can interdivisionally transfer at cost, below cost or above cost. Whatever policy followed, that should be followed consistently and it should be disclosed in the notes to accounts. One more important thing, in Accounting Standard 2, as per Accounting Standard 2, exclusion from the cost of inventory topic we have considered, we are not adding any interest cost in the cost of inventory. But if that interest is eligible for capitalization under Accounting Standard 2 as per AS 16 and read with AS 16, then simply it will be considered. Clear? So finally, this is the end of Accounting Standard 17. Friends, next Accounting Standard 18 is a related party disclosure. And why this particular accounting standard is required? Because please understand, number of times whenever we are doing the transactions with the related party, 110% chances is that that transaction is not at an arm's length price. And if that transaction is not at an arm's length price, 110%, that actually my financial statement in that situation is not that much reliable. So simply, you have to disclose the related party transaction in the notes to accounts. Simple, please understand, this accounting standard is applicable into both standalone financial statement and the consolidated financial statement. But yes, in consolidated financial statement, if any transaction is entered between the parent, subsidiary, associate and joint venture, that transaction is not disclosed as a related party disclosure because that transaction was already eliminated at the time of the consolidated financial statement. Clear? So this is the basic objective. Any relationship is because of the two things. That relationship is because of the control or because of the significant influence. How can we determine that of one person or entity is controlling my reporting entity? Clear? Simply for control, there are three conditions. If you are fulfilling any one conditions, then I can tell you any person or entity is controlling my reporting entity. Clear? Number one, when one party has a more than 50% voting power directly or indirectly in the reporting entity. Number two, when one party has a right to appoint a majority of the directors, means that party has a power to compose the governing body. And the number three, when one party has a 20% or the more voting power and it has a power to direct financial and operational matters of the entity. If you are fulfilling any one conditions, then I can tell you that party is actually controlling my reporting entity. Significant influence is because of the many of the thing, by representation of the board of directors. If you are participating in the policy making process, there is a material intercompany transaction, interchange of the management personnel, and if you are dependent on the technical information of other, then simply I can tell you that person is significantly influencing you. Clear? Simple. I am now starting the definition of the related party. In the definition of related party is given under the para 3 of Accounting Standard 18, and there are 5 clauses A, B, C, D, E. Clear? If we discuss the number A clause, that is nothing but enterprise, which directly or indirectly through subsidiary controlled or are under common control with the reporting entity. So in the clause number 1, basically we are discussing about the holding, subsidiary, sub-subsidiary and the fellow subsidiary. Clear? Number 2, associate and the joint venture of the reporting enterprise and the venture in respect of which the reporting enterprise is an associate or joint venture. So simply here we are considering just the associate and joint venture. Yes, number of students are making a mistake in the joint venture. Let's assume A and B is nothing but the co-venturer and they opened the joint venture in the name of the XY. For XY, A and B both are related party. For A, XY is a related party. For B, XY is a related party. But A and B is not related party to each other. Means for the joint venture, co-venturers are the related party. For the co-venturer, joint venture is the related party. But for the one co-venturer, another co-venturer is not a related party. Clear? Next, if I consider, Individual owing directly or indirectly an interest in the voting power of the enterprise that gives them control or significant influence over the enterprise. If individual is in the definition of the related party, the relative of individual is also considered as a related party. And as per Accounting Standard 18, relative of individual includes father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, and our main party spouse. Clear? 7% is considered. Means if I speak the summary of the clause number 3, that is nothing but the individual and his relative. Number 4, key management personnel and the relative of such personnel. So simple, KMP and his relative is again the related party. And the number 5, enterprise over which individual or the key management personnel described as above is able to exercise significant influence. Clear? Simple, these are the related party. Clear? Please understand. If any relationship is established because of the control and you have not entered into the transaction in the current year, still you have to disclose minimum 2 things. Number 1, the name of related party, and the number 2, that is nothing but the nature of relationship. If any relationship is established because of the significant influence and in the current year you have not entered into any of the transaction, then no disclosure is required. Understand? If you are having a control and if you are not entering into the transaction, still 2 disclosure is required, that is name of relation party and the name of relation and the relationship nature. If any related party is nothing but because of the significant influence and you are not entering into any of the transaction, then disclosure is not required. Clear? Next and the most important point. But if you are entering into the transaction with the related party, then you have to disclose some minimum things, that is nothing but the name of related party, nature of relationship, nature of transaction, amount of transaction, quantity if possible, and if in the current year, if any bad debt is written off, then you have to disclose that. Friends, please understand, if some information is a confidentiality is required, then simple, if we are not disclosing that information, then it will be okay. If for some particular time period we are in the relationship, for the remaining other years we are not in the relationship, then still we have to disclose the related party transaction for the period in which we are in the relationship. Otherwise, the disclosure is not at all required. Clear? If any transaction is entered at the arm's length price, then again you have to disclose the transaction. Perfect? Non-executive director and the key management personnel. Basically, the non-executive director is not a related party, but KMP is considered as a related party. Clear? So finally, this is the end of Accounting Standard 18. Perfect? Okay. Now if we start the next accounting standard, and that is nothing but the Accounting Standard 19, lease. Friends, please understand, what is the basic meaning of the lease? If any party transfers its right to use of asset to another person for consideration or the series of a consideration, then simply that particular contract will be considered as a lease. If any party enters into the contract for transferring the right to use of an asset for consideration or the series of a consideration, that particular contract will be considered as a lease. Please understand, whenever it's a lease contract, basically there are 2 parties. One is a lessor and the second is the lessee. Lessor is basically party who is transferring his asset, and the lessee is the party who is receiving the asset. Clear? You know very well there are 2 types of lease, and the accounting of the both lease is a different. One is a finance lease and the second is the operating lease. Finance lease means is a lease in which the risk and reward incidental to ownership is transferred to the lessee. But in the operating lease, we are not transferring risk and reward incidental to asset to the lessee. So in the finance lease, the asset is not recorded in the books of the lessor, but asset is recorded in the books of the lessee. But in the operating lease, we are not transferring any risk and reward incidental to our asset to the lessee. So that's why asset is continuously recorded in the books of the lessor only. But yes, from the question or in a practical life, how can we determine that this particular lease is a finance lease or the operating lease? Friends, accounting standard 19 has given basically 4 conditions. If you are fulfilling any of the 1 conditions, then I can tell you that particular lease will be considered as a finance lease. Number 1, if lessee will get the automatic ownership at the end of the lease term. Number 2, if lessee has the option to purchase the asset either with consideration or the without consideration. Number 3, if your lease term cover substantial portion of the useful life of the asset. Number 4, if your present value of the lease payment cover substantial portion of the fair value of the asset. And the number 5, asset which are specialized in the nature and cannot be used by any other party without major modification. Clear? Number 1 and 2 point is nothing but of the ownership. Number 3 is related to useful life. Number 4 is related to the lease payment, and the number 5 is related to the special nature of the asset. If you are fulfilling any of the 1 conditions, then I can tell you that particular lease will be considered as a finance lease, and in the remaining cases it will be considered as an operating lease. In particular, accounting standard 19, you have to understand the 5 things. Finance lease in the books of lessee, finance lease in the books of lessor, operating lease in the books of lessee, operating lease in the books of lessor, and number 5th is nothing but the sale and the lease back transaction. Clear? So if we discuss one by one, number 1 is nothing but the finance lease in the books of the lessee. Friends, this is a finance lease and we are learning the accounting in the books of the lessee. So you know very well the asset will be recorded in the books of the lessee only. And what is our accounting entry? Our accounting entry is nothing but the asset on lease account debit to lessor account. Most important point is that you have to understand the amount. Actually, the asset will be recognized in the books of the lessee at fair value of asset or present value of the minimum lease payment, whichever is lower. Now you should understand that what is the meaning of the minimum lease payment. Friend, minimum lease payment is nothing but the agreed lease rental plus guaranteed residual value. Now number of students are having a doubt, sir, what is the meaning of the residual value? If at the end of the lease term my lessor demands 25 lakh for the transfer of the ownership, but I have committed 15 lakh. Clear? So obviously the unguaranteed residual value is 10 lakh. Please remember, expected and unguaranteed residual value is always from the viewpoint of lessor, but the guaranteed residual value is always from the viewpoint of lessee. And now we are doing the accounting in the books of the lessee. That's why we have taken the amount of the guaranteed residual value. Clear? So my first entry will be asset on lease account debit to lessor account. By which amount? Fair value of asset or the present value of the minimum lease payment, whichever is lower. And what is the meaning of the minimum lease payment? It is nothing but the agreed lease rental plus the guaranteed residual value. Second entry we will provide for the interest expense, and that is nothing but the interest expense account debit to bank account. Third entry we will pass for the payment, and my entry will be lessor account debit to bank account. Fourth entry we will pass for the depreciation, and my entry will be depreciation account debit to asset on lease account. And fifth entry, that is nothing but the both expenses will be transferred to the P&L, and in that situation my entry will be P&L account debit to interest expense to depreciation. So basically in the books of the lessee we are providing the 5 entries. Clear? Okay. Now we are starting with the finance lease in the books of the lessor. Means friends, lessor means the person who is transferring the asset. If in the finance lease the asset will be recorded by the lessee, can I say so lessor should de-recognize the asset? And the first entry we will pass, that is nothing but the lease receivable account debit to asset on lease account. Friends, by which amount? Friends, actually in this case you can also write the sale if this is the main activity of your business. Clear? By which amount? So actually from the books of the lessor we should de-recognize the asset with the amount of the net investment. And what is the net investment? Is it nothing but the present value of the gross investment. What is the meaning of the gross investment? It is nothing but the minimum lease payment plus the unguaranteed residual value. You know very well the minimum lease payment is nothing but the agreed lease rental plus guaranteed, and in the formula there was the unguaranteed also. So simple guaranteed plus unguaranteed expected. Please remember my one line for solving the any questions of accounting standard 19 at intermediate level. When you find the book of the lessee, you should consider the guaranteed residual value. But when you find the book of the lessor, you should consider the expected residual value. Clear? Now, second entry we will pass in our books for the recognition of the interest income, and my entry should be lease receivable account debit to interest income. Third entry we will pass for the receipt of the payment, and my entry should be bank account debit to lease receivable, and the fourth entry, that is closing entry, lease receivable account debit to P&L. Please understand, finance lease in the books of lessee we will consider guaranteed residual value. In the books of lessor we will consider the expected residual value. In the books of the lessee, basically friends, please understand, in the books of the lessee we will consider that is 5 entry, and in the books of the lessor we will consider the 4 entry. Clear? Which entries in the books of the lessee? Asset to lessor, interest to lessor, lessor to bank, debris to asset, P&L to interest to debris. And in the books of the lessor, you should pass a 4 entry, lessee to asset, lessee to interest, bank to lessee, interest to P&L. Clear? Now I am starting with the operating lease. Friends, operating lease in the books of the lessee. In lessee's book, we are not recognizing any asset in case of operating lease. So whatever he is making a payment, it will be considered as a rent expense, and we will pass an entry, rent expense account debit to bank, or if payment is pending then to lessor, and that expense is charged to P&L. But when we will discuss the accounting in the books of the lessor, so please understand, in the books of the lessor, we are not de-recognizing the asset. So simply he will recognize the income in his books, and the entry will be lessee or bank account debit to rent income account. Clear? Simple, he will provide the depreciation. So depreciation account debit to asset, expense is transferred to P&L side debit, and the income is credited to P&L. In accounting standard 19, they were asked one question for the unearned finance income. Friends, unearned finance income is nothing but the gross investment minus net investment. Clear? And the last topic, that is nothing but the sale and the lease back. If you are selling the asset, then you are a seller, other party is buyer. And from that person only you are taking the asset on the lease. In that situation, that person will be considered as a lessor and you are a lessee. So please understand, seller and lessee is always one person, and the buyer and lessor will be always one person. Whenever you are taking the asset on the lease back rather, then you have to determine that lease is a finance lease or the operating lease. If that lease is a finance lease, then the difference between the carrying amount and the selling price is not recognized immediately as a profit or loss. That difference should be amortized over the period of the lease term. Clear? Next point, and that should be amortized over the period of the lease term in the ratio of the depreciation. And if the method of depreciation is not given in the question, then friends, you should use SLM. But if that lease back is basically an operating lease, then simple, up to fair value you can recognize profit or loss immediately. But if you are selling the particular property more than the fair value, the difference between the selling price and the fair value is not recognized immediately. That difference should be recognized over the period of the lease term. Clear? So finally I am ending with accounting standard 19. And now we are starting with the accounting standard 20, one of the good accounting standard of group 2. And the name of accounting standard 20 is nothing but the earning per share. Friends, name is earning per share. So if your profit is 100, your number of share is 10, you should disclose the earning per share at 10 rupees. If your loss is 100 and if your number of share is 10, then again you should disclose the earning per share at a negative 10. The name is not a profit per share. Friends, name is a earning per share. And that earning can be negative also. Clear? Friends, as per accounting standard 20, there are two types of EPS. One is nothing but the basic earning per share and second is nothing but the diluted earning per share. Friends, EPS disclosure is mandatory in the consolidated financial statement and the standalone financial statement also. Obviously, whenever you are disclosing the earning per share in the standalone financial statement, then you should use the standalone information. But whenever you are disclosing the earning per share in the consolidated financial statement, friends, you should use the consolidated information. Clear? We are starting our discussion with the basic earning per share. Friends, what is the formula for the basic earning per share? It is nothing but the profits available to the equity shareholder divided by the weighted average number of shares. So basically, in the formula of the basic earning per share, we are considering the two things. One is profit available to equity shareholder and second is nothing but the weighted average number of shares. So if we start our discussion with the profit available to equity shareholder, formula is like this: profit after tax less preference dividend less dividend distribution tax on the preference dividend. Now please understand some basic point. If you are, first of all, extraordinary item should be considered at the time of the calculation of the earning per share. Even prior period item is also considered at the time of the calculation of the earning per share. But if you are transferring any amount to the general reserve, or if you are declaring any dividend on the equity share, then it will not be considered at the time of the calculation of the earning per share, rather profit after tax. You should understand that from the viewpoint of the dividend, there are two types of preference share. Number one is nothing but the cumulative preference share, and the number two is nothing but the non-cumulative preference share. Friends, first of all, let's discuss about the cumulative and the non-cumulative. If in the current year, because of the insufficient profit, if you are not making any payment of dividend to the preference shareholder, still you have to pay that dividend in the future. Whenever you are having a sufficient profit, then you have to, then that particular preference share will be considered as a cumulative preference share. But if in the current year, because of the insufficient profit, if we are not making any payment of dividend to our preference shareholder, then it will be forgotten by the preference shareholder and for the company also. Clear? So this point you should consider at the time of the calculation of the profit after tax. Whenever we are calculating the weighted average number of share, there are various situations. If any bonus share, then the weightage is considered from the first day. If it is amalgamation in the nature of merger, then again weightage is considered from the day one. If it is amalgamation in the nature of the purchase, then weightage is considered from the date of the cash receivable. If this is the nothing but the against any share is services received, then weightage is considered from the date of services received. If it is a convertible instrument, then weightage is considered from the date of conversion. If it is an exchange of the cash, then the weightage is considered from the date of cash receivable and not the date of the cash received. If it is in lieu of the interest on the principal, the date on which interest ceases to occur. Clear? Then we have learned one topic that is called the restatement of EPS. Friends, restatement of EPS means adjusted EPS calculation is basically required in a three situation if you ask me. Number one, if it is a case of the bonus, and then number two, it's nothing but the alteration of share capital. For alteration of share capital, I can tell you number 2 and 3. That is nothing but the consolidation of the shares and the split off of the shares. Friends, because of the bonus, because of the consolidation of the share, or because of the split off of the share, please remember one thing: the wealth of the shareholder is not changing, just the number of share is changing. So in that situation, you have to compulsorily find out the restated EPS or the adjusted EPS of the previous year. Then we have started the discussion of the right issue. Friend, right issue is basically giving to the existing shareholder and at a lower than the market price. You should understand that right is not a mandatory. If you want to exercise, you can, or if you don't want to exercise, you can renounce your right. So whenever you are finding any question of the right issue, your answer should be in the 3 step. Number 1 step is nothing but the theoretical X right value. This is nothing but the weighted average. And what is the formula for the theoretical X right value? Number of shares before right into market price before right plus right issue into right price divided by total number of shares after right. So basically, if you ask me, theoretical X rate value, if I get the answer as a 1.15, then what is the meaning of this 1.15? 0.15, let's assume this theoretical X rate value. My answer is, let's say, 10 rupees. This 10 suggests after right, your market price should be 10 only. In a step 2, we will calculate the right factor. And friends, what is the formula for the right factor? It is nothing but the market price before right divided by theoretical X right value. If I consider the answer as a 1.15, what this 1.15 suggests? 0.15 share is a bonus element against the 1 share. And clear? In the step 3, we will calculate we are bifurcating the total shares into the 2 part. Number 1, opening share into the right factor. We will always consider from the day 1. And the number 2, that is a balancing figure, will be considered from the date of the right issue. Now, just calculate the weighted average and you will get the answer of the basic earning per share. After right issue, friends, we have started the discussion of the diluted earning per share. Friends, what is the meaning of the diluted EPS? Any decrease in the value of EPS due to potential equity share. Now you should understand the meaning of the potential equity share. Friends, basically if you ask me, potential equity share means any financial instrument which will be converted into the equity share. Clear? This is not converted today, but this will be converted into the future. Friends, whenever you are finding any question of the diluted earning per share, first of all, you should calculate, first step is increase in earning, and in the second step, you should calculate the increase in number of share. You know very well, in option, your increase in earning is always 0. In convertible debenture, your increase in earning is I into 1 minus T. In convertible preference share, friends, your increase in earning is preference dividend plus the dividend distribution tax on the preference dividend. But yes, you should also keep one thing in your mind. Whenever your capital structure is a complex capital structure, and what is the meaning of the complex? First of all, what is the meaning of the capital structure? It is nothing but the debt plus equity. And if your capital structure is a complex capital structure, then you should find out the dilution effect. And friends, what is the meaning of the dilution effect? Formula of the dilution effect is nothing but the increase in earning divided by increase in number of share. Clear and simple? Obviously, you know very well. Options answer is always 0. And for that dilution effect, friends, you should follow the ascending order. Clear? If you are not following the ascending order, then your answer should be will be in this sequence: basic, diluted, anti-diluted, again diluted. But if you are following the ascending order, means if you are following the correct order, then your answer will be in this sequence: basic, diluted, again diluted, and finally anti-diluted. Clear? It is not a rule that anti-diluted should be there, but rule is that anti-diluted should be at the last only. Clear? So this is all about the accounting standard 19. Now if we start with accounting standard 20, now if we start accounting standard 22, that is nothing but the accounting for taxes on income. For student, it's a very difficult accounting standard, but for me, it's the most easiest accounting standard, like accounting standard 1 only, if you are comfortable with the logic. Clear? What is the logic behind this particular accounting standard? We are recognizing this particular accounting standard because of the 3 objectives. One is nothing but the accrual concept. Second is nothing but the matching concept. Clear? And the third is nothing but the periodicity concept. Just take an example. This is the data of the account and this is the data of the tax. If I consider my profit before depreciation, let's say it's 100. And if I consider the depreciation, let's say it's 15 and let's say it's 10. Just figure 10 and 15. Can I say my accounting income is nothing but the 90, but my taxable income is nothing but the 85? So whenever you are making the payment of the tax to the government, you will pay tax on the income of rupees 85. But don't you think so? You have recognized the income of rupees 5 more in accounting record. So on that income also you should recognize the tax expense. Simple. That is called the matching concept, prudence concept, accrual concept. Clear? First of all, whenever I am using the word the accounting for the taxes on income, it will be only and only applicable to the income tax. Other than income tax, we will not cover in this particular topic. Clear? Why? Because the problem is that Because the problem is that whenever I'm using the word that is income tax, you should understand the basic meaning. What is that meaning? Other than income tax, like indirect taxes, we will not cover. If anyone asks you, can we consider the dividend distribution tax? Answer is no. Dividend distribution tax is basically not a tax on income, but it is a tax on the distribution of income. And if it is a tax on the distribution of income, then again it will not be considered. Whenever I am using the word the accounting income, that accounting income is nothing but the profit before tax. Whenever I am using the word the taxable income, means this income is calculated as per the taxable profit by under the income tax act 1961 or any other foreign tax law. Clear? Friends, please understand. You know very well what is the formula for the tax expense? Current tax plus DTL minus DTA. So simple. What is the meaning of the current tax? Whatever the amount payable to the government in the current year as a tax will be considered as a current tax. And please understand, for the current tax we will use always the current year tax rate only. What is the deferred tax? If we are recognizing any tax because of the timing difference, what is the timing difference I am explaining? And for deferred tax, we will always use the future tax rate. Please understand, deferred tax is only created on the timing difference, and the deferred tax is not created on the permanent difference. First of all, you should understand the meaning of the timing difference. If any difference is generated in the current year, which is capable of the reversal in the one or more future year, then it will be considered as a timing difference. In a simple language, in a layman language, for the specifically intermediate student, if you ask me, if any income is recorded in the current year in accounts, but it will be taxable in the future. If any expense is recorded in the accounts in the current year, but for that deduction will be available in the future, then it will be considered as a timing difference. We are having the various example. Differences because of the rate of depreciation, because of the method of depreciation. Some expenses we are recording in the accounts, but that will be deductible in the future. Best example is nothing but section 43B of the income tax. And you know very well, we are always creating the deferred tax asset on unabsorbed depreciation and the carry forward of losses. Clear? What is the meaning of the permanent difference? If any difference is generated in the current year, which is not capable of the reversal in the future year, then it will be considered as a permanent difference. In the layman language, for intermediate student, I can explain you. In the accounts, we have recognized the income in the current year, but that amount is actually not taxable in the future year. We have recognized the expense in our books of accounts, but for which we are not eligible to take the deduction in the future, then simply it will be considered as a permanent difference. And please understand that on permanent difference, we are not recognizing any deferred tax. Clear? Base example is donation to private trust, dividend from the Indian company. If you are comfortable with the summary, if your accounting income is greater than the taxable income, then friends, you should recognize the deferred tax liability. But if your accounting income is less than the taxable income, friends, you should recognize the deferred tax asset. Clear? Okay, we have done various questions against that related to that. But yes, friends, please understand. Because of the timing difference, it may be possible on that timing difference that timing difference creates DTL, then don't worry. But if that timing difference creates the deferred tax asset, then don't you think so? Actually, it's a violation of the prudence and the conservatism concept. And that's why para 15 and para 17 of the accounting standard 22 came in the picture. Just remember my one line. Before providing the deferred tax asset, you have to wait and you have to think that if this is the case of the unabsorbed depreciation and the carry forward of losses, then on unabsorbed depreciation and carry forward of losses, we have to recognize the DTA, but that DTA is only created if there is a virtual certainty supported with the convincing evidence that we will have sufficient taxable income in the future against which we can set off the deferred tax asset. But yes, for cases other than unabsorbed depreciation and carry forward of losses like provision, like preliminary expenses, if we are recognizing the DTL, then DTA is only created if there is a reasonable certainty that we will have the sufficient future taxable income against which such DTA can be set off. Clear? Friends, you focus that whenever it was the case of the unabsorbed depreciation and carry forward of losses, we should have the virtual certainty. For other cases, we should have the reasonable certainty. Virtual means supported with evidence, and the reasonable means we will tell on the basis of the past experience. Clear? We already explained in the class. Friends, deferred tax asset and deferred tax liability is always disclosed on the face of the balance sheet. It will be no doubt set off in the future, but we are never finding out the present value, means it is never and ever discounted. Clear? Can we set off the balance of the deferred tax asset and the deferred tax liability to each other? Answer is yes, under the two situations. If that deferred tax asset and the deferred tax liability is created under the same tax law and the entity has a legally enforceable right to set off, then you can set off the deferred tax asset with the deferred tax liability. Clear? Now, I want to take three special topics, and the number one is nothing but the tax holiday period. Friends, what is the tax holiday period? Actually, the Income Tax Act 1961 is giving the various tax holiday under section 80IA, IB, IC, under section 10A, 10B, 10C. Friends, if any difference is generated during tax holiday, which is expected to be reversed within tax holiday, then it should be ignored for the purpose of the deferred tax. But if any difference is generated during tax holiday, which is expected to be reversed after tax holiday, then it should be considered for the purpose of the deferred tax. And whenever you are reversing the timing difference, friends, you should follow the FIFO method. Friends, this is the only accounting standard in which we are using the FIFO. Clear? Next, MAT. MAT is full form is nothing but the minimum alternate tax. MAT is only applicable to the companies. For partnership, there is one more section called section 115JC of the Income Tax Act. And on partnership, one more extra tax, that is nothing but the AMT, alternate minimum tax, is applicable. Now, what is the purpose behind that? Please understand. Now you are having the three profits in your question. Number one, you are having the accounting profit, you are having the taxable profit, and number third, you are having the MAT profit. First of all, we are calculating the current tax. And for finding out the current tax, we will calculate the tax on the normal income. We will calculate the tax as per MAT, and whichever is higher, we will pay to the government. Clear? This is nothing but my current tax. But yes, if there is no data, then the difference between the accounting profit and the taxable profit will be considered as a timing difference. And on that timing difference, we should recognize the deferred tax. But whenever you are recognizing the deferred tax should be at a normal rate only. Then, there is one more point. According to section 115JB of the Income Tax 1961, if in any current year, if you are making the payment of the tax under MAT, then whatever the excess tax over and above the normal tax will be considered as a MAT credit receivable that can be carried forward for the 10 years and can be set off against your future normal tax liability. So basically, friends, MAT credit is an asset that should be disclosed under the heading of the loans and advances. If you are expecting that you will make the set off of the MAT credit within the 12 months from the reporting date, then it will be considered as a short-term loans and advances. But if you are expecting that you can set off after 12 months, then it will be considered as a long-term loans and advances. And yes, friends, please remember, and it should be disclosed under the heading of the balance with revenue authority. And the last, if I can check, friends, you learn one topic of the capital gain. Whenever we are selling our depreciable asset, maybe within 3 years or after 3 years and whatever, this is always the short-term capital gain. In accounts, till the date the asset is sold, we are providing the depreciation on that asset. We are finding out the net book value of that asset, and we will compare the net book value with the selling price of the asset, and whatever the difference, that difference will be considered as a gain or loss and will be recognized in the statement of profit and loss. But in taxation, as per section 32, there are some different calculation. If in the current year, if we have sold any of the asset, then first of all, whatever the sales consideration we are receiving, that sales consideration is deducted from the block of the asset. If there is any block is pending, then we will calculate the depreciation on the net block. And if there is a no block is remaining, still we have excess amount, then it will be considered as a short-term capital gain. Clear? And on that timing difference, we should recognize the deferred tax. So finally, I am ending my accounting standard 22, and now I am starting with my accounting standard 24. This is one of the easiest accounting standard again in group 2, pure theoretical. The name of accounting standard 24 is nothing but the discontinuing operation, pure theoretical. Friends, this standard covers the discontinuing operation rather than the discontinued operation. If any operation was already discontinued, then it is not in the scope of the accounting standard 24. Friends, we are having one more accounting standard, that is nothing but the accounting standard 17, segment reporting. A17 is just providing the segment wise information, but will not provide whether any particular segment will continue in a future or not. So as a stakeholder, we have to understand that if any particular segment is discontinuing by the management, then how it affects the financial performance, financial position and the cash flows of the particular entity. Clear? That is suggested by the accounting standard 24. Actually, what is the meaning of the discontinuing operation? The definition is given under the para 3 of accounting standard 24. Friends, discontinuing operation means the component of a business that is being disposed of with a pursuant to a single plan. And what is the meaning of the dispose of? Dispose of means that is disposed either in a lump sum or in a piecemeal or termination of an enterprise. And second point, that represent the separate major line of the business or the geographical segment. And the third point, that is financially and the operationally separable. Clear? There are various examples which is actually not considered as a discontinuing operation. Number one, if your entity is changing its product mix, if there is an improvement in the machinery, if you are transferring your business location, if you are outsourcing your any of the production process, if you are selling your investment, if you are gradually declining the production. Clear? Simple, this will not be considered even your discontinuing operation. Then there is one more topic in the AS24, that is nothing but the initial disclosure event. Means when we should start the disclosure of the discontinuing operation. There are two conditions, whichever is earlier concept. Number one, if company has entered into the binding agreement for the sale of the major assets of the discontinuing operation, and company has made a detailed plan for the discontinuing operation, and that announcement is made to the stakeholder. If any condition is first fulfilled, then you should start the disclosure of the discontinuing operation. Clear? And the what disclosure is required? Description of discontinuing operation, segment affected, employees affected, assets, liabilities, profit and loss, and the cash flow. One more important thing is that if on the 1st January 2020, if some particular operation is classified as a discontinuing operation, and let's assume on 25th February 2020 we have sold that, then still on 31st March 20 financial statement we have to disclose as a discontinuing operation, because on single date if that particular operation qualifies for the discontinuing operation, we have to disclose that. Rule is that my accounting standard is not only applicable on the balance sheet date, but my accounting standard is applicable for the entire year. So simple, this particular thing will be considered as a discontinuing operation for the financial year 1920. But yes, this particular thing will not be considered as a discontinuing operation in the year 2020-21. And yes, if there is any profit or loss on because of the discontinuing operation, it should be separately disclosed on the face of P&L. So if you check, format is like this: profit from the continuing operation and the profit from the discontinuing operation. Clear? So finally, I am ending my AS24 here. Second last accounting standard, that is accounting standard 26, intangible asset. Again, one of the good accounting standard. Friends, first of all, you should understand the meaning of an asset. Asset means any resource which is owned or controlled by an enterprise as a result of a past event from which future economic benefit is expected. What is the meaning of an intangible asset? Intangible asset means any identifiable non-monetary asset without physical substance held for consumption in production of goods or the rendering of services. I use the word identifiable. Identifiable means which means capable to sell, capable to let out, capable to exchange. Non-monetary means other than monetary. Without physical substance means which cannot be seen, which cannot be touched. Sir, what is the meaning of the non-monetary? Non-monetary means other than monetary, and monetary is nothing but which is mentioned in accounting standard 11. Clear? Second thing, how can we recognize the intangible asset in our books of accounts if they fulfills the recognition criteria? That must have a characteristic of the asset. It is probable that the future economic benefits will flow to the entity. And the number third, that is nothing but the cost of the intangible asset should be measured reliably. Whenever you are purchasing any intangible asset, simply friends, you have to capitalize the purchase price, including any non-refundable taxes and import duties. if any directly attributable costs incurred to obtain the intangible asset and the legal expenses. Friends, if we are making the exchange of the intangible asset, then the new asset will be recognized at a fair value of asset given or the fair value of asset taken, whichever is more clearly evident. And if in the question you are having the both fair value of asset given also and the fair value of asset taken also, for you fair value of asset given is a more clearly evident. But when your transaction lacks commercial substance, or when the fair value of asset given and taken is not available, in that situation you should recognize the new asset at book value of asset given less cash received, if any. Clear? Sometimes it's a combination of the accounting standard 10 plus accounting standard 26, means it's a combination of the tangible and the intangible asset both, and for that judgment is required to assess which is a predominant. Friends, simply if you understand, if the value of the storage device is material, then it will be considered as a tangible and the intangible both. But if the storage device value is not material, the entire asset will be considered as an intangible asset. Clear? We cannot recognize any self-generated asset in the books of, we can recognize the self-generated asset in the books of accounts except the goodwill. Most important point of the accounting standard 26 is nothing but the research and development. Friends, research is nothing but basically the gaining of the knowledge, and the development is nothing but basically the application of the knowledge. If any expense is incurred on the research phase, it should be charged to the P&L. But if any expense is incurred on the development phase, then it should be capitalized. How can we determine that my development phase is already started? If you are getting the approval of the management, technical feasibility is already established, and you are finding that the market exists for the intangible asset. Clear? But yes, whenever you are capitalizing the expense for the development phase, you should ensure that it is maximum up to the recoverable amount of the asset. Clear? Next point is nothing but the amortization of the intangible asset. The next point is nothing but the subsequent measurement of the intangible asset. If any subsequent expenditure incurred on the intangible asset normally should be charged to P&L. But because of that expenditure, if you are getting the more future economic benefits, then that it should be capitalized. For subsequent measurement, you are having a two choice, only one choice. That is nothing but the only cost model is applicable. Revaluation of the intangible asset is not allowed as per the accounting standard 26. Clear? Next, if I go ahead, what is the meaning of the amortization? Friends, amortization is nothing but the systematic allocation of the total cost of the tangible assets, of the intangible assets over its useful life. Normally, amortization should be in the ratio of the future economic benefit. But if it is not really readily measurable, then we can use the straight line method. But whenever we are doing the straight line method, scrap value is only deducted if it is a guaranteed. If there is an estimated scrap value, then it is never and ever deducted. As per accounting standard 26, maximum useful life of the intangible asset should be 10 years. If you want to take the less than 10 years, then it will be okay. But if you want to take the more than 10 years, then for that compulsorily you should have, that is nothing but the clear evidence. Clear? But if any goodwill is generated under the amalgamation, means under the accounting standard 14, then that goodwill should be written off over the maximum period of the 5 years. Clear? Now the last accounting standard for revision purpose, accounting standard 29, provisions, contingent liability and the contingent asset. Friends, what is the meaning of the provision? Friends, provision means a liability but amount is estimated. And what is the meaning of the liability? Basically, the liability is a present obligation as a result of the past event in which you are expected to have some outflow. That outflow is maybe in a cash or maybe in the kind. Friends, please understand, under accounting standard 4 and accounting standard 29, we are covering the both provision. Accounting standard 4 deals with only those provisions which are adjusted against the balance of the asset. But accounting standard 29 deals with only those provisions which are separately disclosed on the liability side. If it is a provision for bad debt, then simply it should be adjusted with the balance of the asset, so it will be covered under the accounting standard 4. But if it is a warranty provision, then it should be separately disclosed, and in that particular situation, accounting standard 29 will be applicable. Provision will be created whether you know the party or you don't know the party. If any law is changing and because of that any provision arises, then simply it will be only recognized when the law is virtually certain to be enacted. In accounting standard, we are not finding out the present value of the provision. We are recognizing the absolute amount only, except one provision under accounting standard 10, and that is nothing but the provision for the dismantling cost. Friends, provision is always a before tax and not even a after tax. Clear? There is a one topic that is called the onerous contract. Friends, onerous is nothing but the burdensome. In any contract, if you are finding out that your contract cost is more than the contract revenue, then it will be considered as an onerous contract. If we are taking a land on the lease for the 10 years, after 6 years, company is relocating their business operation, clear? So they don't want this particular building. So they tried to cancel the lease contract, but the lessor denied for the lease contract. So they are in a trouble. For 4 years, they have to pay some lease amount, and this will be considered as onerous contract. What is the meaning of the executory contract? If any contract, either both parties perform their partial obligation, then simply it will be considered as an executory contract. Accounting Standard 29 deals with only those executory contracts which are in onerous, and their contingent asset and contingent liability. What is the meaning of the contingencies? Circumstances of the event should be available on the date of balance sheet, result of which is not known. Result is only known after happening or non-happening of future uncertain event, which is not either wholly or partly within the control of the enterprise. Result may be a gain or may be a loss. If it is a contingent gain, then it is never recorded. But if it is a contingent loss, then friends, please understand. If it is a probable, then simply you should make a provision. If it is a reasonable, then simply disclose in the notes to accounts. But if it is a remote, then it should be ignored. Clear? What is the meaning of the probable? The event, the probability is more than 50%. Reasonable means more than 5%, but up to 50%. And the reasonable means less than or equal to 5%. What is the meaning of the restructure? Restructuring is basically a program that is planned on control by the management and materially changes either the scope of the business or the manner in which the business is conducted. Clear? Simply, I am ending my revision session on accounting standards of the group 2. Thank you friends. Thank you very much.
If you like this video, share it with your friends. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch more such videos and learn from our expert faculty members. Press the bell icon to get regular notifications whenever we upload a new video. Download NDI mobile app to get complete CA course online. We value your support. Thank you for watching.